May I speak to you in the name of the living God. Amen. Okay, not 3 sermons, but 3 parts of a sermon, okay? I was told when I was in seminary that every sermon needed to have 3 points and then move away. Done. These aren't necessarily points, but they're ideas, concepts, sayings, maybe quotes. And if you don't remember anything else today, remember these 3 things. The first one is, I'm the greatest. I'm the greatest. Okay? The second one is, the American dream. Okay? And the third is, your arms are too short to box with God. Okay, got those? What were they? Number 1? I'm the greatest. Number 2? American dream. Number 3? Okay, I'm done. Yay! Years ago when I was the rector at Emmanuel Church over in Hampton, there was a huge noise, and right in the middle of the sermon interrupted me, and I've told this story before to some of you. And so, we all stopped, and, oh, what was that? Finally, after everything settled down, I said, where were we? And somebody in the choir yelled, near the end. Let's start with your arms too short to box with God. I'm sure you've heard that expression. Musical, quasi-religious by that name, but the term originated from the author and poet James Weldon Johnson, who's also a hymn writer. In our hymnal, the Episcopal hymnal, there is, and also in the alternate hymnal, Lift Every Voice and Sing, there's a hymn called Lift Every Voice and Sing, and James Weldon Johnson wrote the lyrics to that hymn. He was the first president of the NAACP, a brilliant writer and poet, and in a book called The Autobiography, a novel, The Autobiography of an Ex-Colored Man, he uses that phrase for the first time. He later used it in a poem called The Prodigal Son, where it says, young man, young man, young man, could also be young woman, your arms are too short to box with God. And yet we try to do that, don't we? Take on the Almighty as if we might win. Whenever we have issues, things in our life that we just don't like. Well, that was certainly the case with old Job that we heard about. The 38th chapter of Job is what we read the first part of today, where after 37 chapters hearing about the plight of poor Job, God answers Job in this whirlwind. Now, just to refresh our memories, Job had been a righteous man who did all the things that were expected of him. And he had received great reward for that. He had like 300 head of oxen and a gazillion sheep and servants all over the place and a dozen children. And it was like, wow, everything is perfect. And then all of a sudden, through fire and through storm and through foreigners coming in and killing off all his livestock and his servants, Job ends up with nothing. 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 He's lost it all. So he has good reason to grumble, to whine at least a little bit, okay? But he doesn't want to. All his friends come up to him, and his wife comes up to him and said, you really ought to have a conversation with the Lord and really give it to him. Job resists until finally he says, and we heard this in last week's reading, okay, I'll take my case before God. Asking that question that we all ask at one time or another, why? Why? Why does suffering exist in the world? Why do bad things happen to good people? Generally, we get passionate about that. It's not just an intellectual exercise when it has to do with us, with me. You know, I'm moderately concerned about why bad things happen to you. I'm ultimately concerned when bad things happen to me. Let's be honest. So there Job is, and God speaks in this whirlwind. How many folks are familiar with Roman Catholic priest, writer, mystic, Richard Rohr? A lot of people read Richard Rohr's stuff. Richard Rohr says that when God speaks out of the whirlwind, you know what he says? Shut up, Job. Just shut up. I used to jokingly say about this story that when God finally speaks to Job, who's really hurting, and when Job says, why do these bad things keep happening to me? And God says, I don't know, Job, there's just something about you that ticks me off. I don't believe that for a second, but obviously at least a few of you think that's funny. Shut up. Shut up. And then God proceeds to ask a series of questions to Job. Job has been a questioner so far. Why? And God said, well, wait a minute. Were you there at the creation of the world? Did you set the boundaries of this earth, the sky, and the sea? Did you have anything to do with the creation of this world that's around us? And Job goes, well, no. Oh, okay then. And kind of leaves that. Never answers the question, but asks questions of his own. And my thought with that is, oftentimes we human beings have a whole series of questions to answer for. Well, you know what? Maybe it's just above our pay grade. Maybe it's not for us to know why. Maybe the difference between being human and divine is it's the divine one that would ask the questions of us, not the other way around. And so what is it that God asks of us is not why something happens, but because something has happened, what are you going to do? What are you going to do next in your faithfulness to me? Or are you going to let the circumstances of this life, as horrible as they might be at the moment, are you going to let those set the course for the rest of your life? Years ago, I read this book, and there was a woman in the book, and she said, I pray that when I get old and sick, that somebody will constantly remind me that I love God more than anything. Because I'm afraid when I get old and sick, I'll forget that. And I'll start questioning my faith. So remind me. That's what happens in this encounter between Job and God. God reminds Job that I'm God and you're not. And you know what? Look around at that creation that you didn't have anything to do with, but I did. Look at it. Look at it for a moment. Look at it today. The sky is just as blue. The sun is just as warm. The birds sing just as beautifully, whether we're having the worst day of our life or the best. Maybe this creation that we're a part of isn't all about us. There's birds and there's oxen and there's sheep and there's all sorts of creation out there. And we're a part of it, yes. We're an important part of it, but it's not all about us. So remember that the next time that we choose to go 9 or 10 rounds with God. Our arms are a little short. We can't quite reach where the divine is. And that's what separates us from God. Now, speaking of boxing, there was a boxer once who liked to say, what did he say? I am the greatest, Muhammad Ali, the late, great Muhammad Ali. It's interesting, I was reading some things about Ali recently and some tributes, not just tributes in the sense of singing his praises, but talking about the man he was in private. It's quite interesting. Who he was as an individual was very different than the persona of that he would become, particularly when he was in the company of people like Howard Cosell. A much more humble human being, but he had good press. I am the greatest. It's one thing to have that kind of PR, that kind of promotion. It's another thing to actually believe it about ourselves. Showing my age, because I remember when Johnny Carson hosted The Tonight Show. Some of you may remember that. And John Wayne, famous actor John Wayne, was on the show. And John Wayne was so important that he couldn't even stay for the whole show. He came out, he was introduced, and he lasted until the first commercial break. And then he had to go and do something important because he's John Wayne. So Johnny introduces him, and they talk for a little bit, and the commercial comes, and John Wayne leaves. When they come back from commercial break, Johnny said, the problem with John Wayne is that he thinks he's John Wayne. He let the press kind of get to him. We sometimes feel a little bit too high and mighty about ourselves. We're not the greatest. We hear people saying that, either about themselves. We sometimes hear it said about nations, communities. My country's better than your country. My God's better than your God. I remember as a kid, they used to have really great jingles on TV. Maybe they still do. I don't watch it that anymore. And there was a dog food commercial. Kennel ration. Yeah. My dog's better than your dog. My dog's better than yours. My dog's better because he eats kennel ration. My dog's better than yours. It's ridiculous. Your dog's not better than my dog. But we do that to one another, don't we? My whatever is better than yours. I'm greater than you, which is just another version of the same dynamic that was happening with Job. How could bad things happen to me? Because I've played by the rules. I've done everything right. I deserve the blessings. That was the old way that the people of Israel thought that God worked, in this system of rewards and punishments. You do good, good things happen to you. You do things that are wrong, bad things happen. But it's not like that. That's a myth that we've come to believe, but it's not true. There's other myths like that as well. Jump forward to the gospel reading. James and John, sons of Zebedee. This same story appears in the Gospel of Matthew, although it's interesting, in Matthew's story, it's not James and John that go to Jesus and saying, hey, when you come into your kingdom and your glory, can we sit at your left and right hand? Presumptuous, isn't it? Really? In Matthew's Gospel, it's their mother that goes and does the asking, which I find really, really interesting. But regardless, they come up to Jesus and they go, this is a good gig we've got going here. We like it. There's some people that don't care for us, but most people, they come out and they listen to us, and we like this. People are there and they're cheering for you, and we're there, right there beside you, and we want to keep that thing going for a while. So later on, when you come into your kingdom and your glory, we want to be a part of that. I don't know how Richard Rohr would interpret what Jesus would say to them, but my guess is he would say the same thing that was said to Job. James and John, shut up. It's not your place to ask that. And after all, it's not about being the greatest. It's about being one who serves. So let's think about that as we think about ourselves or our neighborhood, our church, our nation. Are we really called to be the greatest? Wouldn't it be better if we just, instead of being great, we were just good? Just good? Good people? Treating one another with respect. The American dream is something that a lot of people believe in, buy into. That term was first used, it was coined by James Truslow Adams in his 1931 book called Epic of America. And in there, he described it as a dream of a better and fuller life for everyone, with opportunities based on ability and achievement rather than the circumstances of one's birth. Kind of the same thing that Martin Luther King Jr. would say later, that he had a dream that his children would grow up in a nation where people were valued by the content of their character rather than the color of their skin. Adams wrote it was a dream of a land in which life would be better, richer, and fuller. People would have the ability to achieve their best, regardless of their background. But he said, and was very clear about this, he said, this is not a dream about materialism, having a new motor car, or higher wages. In fact, he criticized societal issues such as unbridled capitalism and growing wealth inequality, which he viewed as threats the American dream. But the American dream has changed in how many people view it these days. Dan Reese and I are facilitating the 8th Circle of Sacred Ground here at Old Donation. And how many people have taken part in Sacred Ground? A bunch of folks. I think about 80 people already. And the first session, there's a film that we watched that's called The American Creed. And in there, it addresses this whole issue of the dream, in that a lot of people have felt like they bought into the notion of the dream, but it's a dream that was never realized, never fulfilled in their lives. That they did not find themselves upwardly mobile. They haven't gotten their fair share. That something was promised to them and they didn't get it. And they're angry. And they take it to somebody, whoever will listen. Like Job took it to God. Went into box with God. Its modern interpretation is that the American dream has come to place greater emphasis on material prosperity and economic upward mobility, achieving home ownership, having a stable job, owning a business. But not everybody is able to do that, even if they try hard and work hard and do all the right things. My father grew up, basically they were sharecroppers. They didn't even live in a rented house. They lived in property that somebody else owned, and they worked the land, and they gave most of what they earned to the person that owned it, and they got to live there. And if they had a good season, they got to eat well, and if they didn't... Well, my father rose above that, and he actually, at one point in his life, was able to purchase 2 acres of land. That's pretty significant. He did better than his people did. I've done better than he did. You know, I own me and the bank own a house. But it's interesting. I look at our children, and I have doubts if they'll ever be able to own a home. I don't know. Maybe they will. But the economic reality for them right now is I'm not sure they'll be able to save enough to be able to make that down payment. I don't quite have enough to be able to do that for them. So not everybody can live into that American dream if we look at it as prosperity or home ownership. You see, all of this fits together for me in terms of it's the same thing that starts back with Job, it continues with the disciples, and it carries on for every human being today. That no matter how hard we try, how faithful we are, sometimes it just doesn't work out. It's not enough. And whose fault is that? God would say, it's nobody's fault. The world's not always fair. But can we still somehow find a way to be faithful to one another and to God in all of this? What we see God saying to Job and saying to all of us, that, you know, our personal piety, our strong faith, all of that virtuous behavior is a good thing. It's worthwhile in and of itself for what it provides for us in a feeling of belonging and connectedness. But it may not necessarily equate with personal gain or material success. One last thought about this book of Job, that it may have to do with something else entirely. Another lens that we might look at. Job's catastrophe led him to believe that maybe the world at its very foundation was random and chaotic and could not be trusted. Some people may feel that way today, that it just doesn't seem to make any sense. It's all just a mess out there. What's interesting is that God's response to Job and through those many questions is making it clear that there is a deep order and structure in the universe, that there is meaning to our lives, there is order. And in the universe that is created by God, in which humans live, the challenge is how we hold these two realities together. One's not an answer to the other or a question to the other. The fact is, there is an order, there is a beauty in this world, and we still may suffer. In some ways, these two aspects show very different realities, and that they exist simultaneously. The realities of Job and of God collide, and they're both true. The fact that God responds with these questions, though they're different than Job's questions, they suggest that there's a dialogue between God and Job that's open and it's yet unfinished. And that might be the best news of all in this whole thing, because there's no easy answers to these questions and problems that we have. Richard Rohr has also said that sometimes the church has given the impression that there were ready-made answers, quick soundbite we can give that will respond to your problem and your issue. The fact is, there are no quick, ready answers. To use them possibly creates more harm than good. What Job discovers in his encounter with the divine, what James and John discover in their relation with Jesus. What we all discover when we choose to live into this American dream as a community where the value of each and every person is paramount, whether they be rich, poor, or black, or white, or whatever. That's some of the best news of all. Job finds out that he's not God, but he is connected to God. After God's great speech and his questions, Job is somehow a changed man. Not because of the content of the speech somehow heals him or restores him or makes everything better. Rather, it is a fact that a God whom Job knew about but didn't really know. Now Job has encountered the presence of God in his life in a real and meaningful way. It's a relationship that transforms Job, even in the midst of his profound suffering. Job meets God and sees that in the track of his life that has led him through times of great joy and times of great sorrow. But best of all, Job realizes that in all things his path was held in the hand of a God who was waiting to take him into God's arms, to embrace him, and to ultimately wipe his tears away. Our arms may be too short to box with God, but God's arms are long enough to embrace us and hold us always. Amen. Stand with me now. Let us affirm our faith using the words of the Nicene Creed.